Hey, Howard.
In case you need a lawyer, here's my business card. I'm attorney Howard Ankin.
Oh, hey, Howard.
If you or someone you know has been hurt at work, Ankin Law can get the medical bills paid, the lost wages reimbursed,
Oh, hey, Howard.
and the compensation you deserve.
Hey, Howard.
We're one of the largest filers throughout the state of Illinois of workers' compensation claims. We're here to help. Call 312-6-million. Injury law made personal, that's Ankin Law.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Thursday night, March 5th, 2026, as we record this new episode. While we are closer to opening day, there will be opportunities to spin off podcast episodes to focus on other areas of baseball. Don't worry, our position preview episodes will be starting the upcoming week with a focus on the infielders. Also have our American League Central preview episodes with reporters around the division. But in this episode, I'm fascinated by all of the new technology being used in today's baseball. A lot of times, I wish I had these resources when I played, because I had no idea how hard I was throwing or how hard I was hitting back in high school. It wasn't very hard. I wasn't very good. But kids today do, and that's in large thanks to companies like Rapsodo. And join us later will be Brian Page from Rapsodo, who handles the MLB partnerships for the company. We're going to talk about how the technology has evolved in capturing data, which metrics both on the pitching and hitting side professionals are caring about these days, and what's on the horizon in future implementations. First, let's catch up on White Sox spring training news. When it comes to wins and losses, the White Sox have cooled off a little bit recently. Prior to their Thursday night game against Cleveland, the White Sox are 7-6 during Cactus League play. However, that's a lot better pace than last year, where they were 11-19, and that was better than the 9-20 record they had in spring training back in 2024. Starting with Thursday night's tilt, the White Sox will be playing a spring training game over the next 13 days. So if you've been missing White Sox baseball, do not worry. We're going to get a lot of it in the upcoming weeks. Hopefully, we start getting a little more clarity on these position battles, especially in the outfield. Austin Hayes is in good shape, which is a nice sign to see from the veteran free agent signing. He's currently hitting .263 with a .364 on-base percentage. He's slugging .737 with a couple of home runs. All this action happening in 7 games. Derek Hill is having a nice spring. He's got a .965 OPS. Luis Angel Acuna is back from injury after he needed some stitches on his face. He's 5 for 10 at the plate. Even prospect Braden Montgomery is having a productive spring, but manager Will Venable has already nixed that idea of Montgomery joining the opening day roster. But we are still waiting on Everson Pereira to play, and Jared Kelenich's timing is off as he's 3 for 17 right now at 6 strikeouts to 1 walk. At least Kelenic is on a minor league deal and seems destined to play for the Charlotte Knights on opening day. So podcast listeners, what would be your opening day starting outfield? I'm thinking it's Andrew Benintendi right now in left, Acuna in center, and Hayes in right field. If Pereira doesn't come back and start playing games next week, will he even have enough reps to merit a spot on the 26-man roster on opening day? Or will he need to start the season on the injured list? Well, White Sox have to figure out that answer. More so, Pereira needs to find out that answer. That does open the door to make sure that Brooks Baldwin stays on the 26-man roster and maybe keep Derek Hill too. So it's not exactly a scary unit, but that's what I'm thinking right now for the White Sox outfield a couple of weeks from opening day. If Pereira wants to make this roster and not have to play the waiver wire game, he's got to figure out what's going on with his side and get back on the field and start playing in some games, or that injury is going to make the decision for him. Other notable spring performances. We talked about him last episode, but Edgar Quero stays hot. He's 10 for 20 now That's a .500 batting average with only 2 strikeouts. Miguel Vargas seems locked in too. He's hitting 9 for 20, and what a nice surprise would it be if Vargas steps up his game at third base. Just being a 2-WAR player at third with Colson as shortstop could give the White Sox at least a league average left side of the infield. Vargas has always been a highly touted prospect. Is a 3-WAR season out of the question for Miguel Vargas? Again, next episode we'll have that conversation as we preview the infield. Speaking of Colson, he had a late start due to sickness for this spring training, and he's not setting the world on fire. He's currently 2 for 14 this spring. Over on the pitching side, Chris Murphy leads the White Sox in innings pitched. He has completed 8 innings over 3 games. He's got 8 strikeouts to 2 walks and given up 3 earned runs at the 3.38 earned run average. Jonathan Cannon has 7 strikeouts to only 1 walk in 7 2/3 innings. He's also allowed 3 earned runs in those 3 appearances. The left-handed relievers, Brandon Eisert and Tyler Gilbert, have identical performances so far. Both have pitched 3 innings. Both have only allowed 1 hit. They haven't allowed a run. They haven't walked anyone. And they have both struck out 6 batters. I'm thinking they are competing for the same spot in the White Sox bullpen, and both are having really strong springs. So, not a problem, just a puzzle that Will Venable will have to figure out on how he wants to implement his bullpen on opening day. Winkelmann Gonzalez, he left Tuesday's game against San Diego due to lower back tightness. I wonder if that injury or something else physically is ailing him. He's having a difficult spring performance. He's got 6 walks to just 4 strikeouts while allowing 5 hits in 3 1/3 innings. The World Baseball Classic starting on Wednesday night, and Australia won the opening game 3-0 over Chinese Taipei. Former number 1 overall pick Travis Bazzana hit a big home run for the Aussies. Curtis Mead from the White Sox went 2 for 4 in that game. For the other White Sox players participating in the WBC, their upcoming weekend schedule, Munetaka Murakami, very early games for us in the Midwest. Friday morning, March 6th, 4 a.m. Central Time on FS1, Japan against Chinese Taipei. Saturday at 4 a.m. Central Time on FS1 against Korea. And then on Sunday, March 8th, this is at 5 a.m. Central Time, Japan against Australia. That game also on FS1. Over for Team Italy, which has Kyle Teal and Sam Antonacci. Saturday, 12 p.m. Central Time against Brazil. That game is on the Fox Sports app. Sunday at 12 p.m. Central Time, Italy against Great Britain. That's on Tubi. And then Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Time, Italy against Team USA. That game is going to be on FS1. Sir Anthony Dominguez looks lined up to be pitching on Saturday, March 8th at 11 a.m. Central Time. That game for the Dominican Republic against the Netherlands, that game is going to be on Fox. Team USA this weekend, Friday night, 7 p.m. Central Time against Brazil. That game, all these games are going to be on Fox for Team USA. San Francisco Giants starting pitcher Logan Webb will get that start. On Saturday night, it's against Great Britain. Detroit Tigers starting pitcher Tarek Skubal. And then Monday night, USA against Mexico. It'll be Paul Skeens getting the start for Team USA. Good luck, Great Britain and Mexico, going up against Tarek Skubal and Paul Skeens. Finally, former White Sox TV play-by-play announcer Jason Benetti is leaving Fox Sports to take over as NBC's main baseball play-by-play broadcaster for their upcoming Sunday night baseball games on NBC and Peacock. His first broadcast with NBC will be on March 26th as the Arizona Diamondbacks visit the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Chicago White Sox are not scheduled for any Sunday night baseball games this upcoming season on NBC and Peacock. They are scheduled for a Sunday leadoff game on Peacock for July 19th, that game at Toronto, which the first pitch will be at 11 a.m. Central Time. Currently, that's the only White Sox game on NBC or Peacock this upcoming 2026 season. So for White Sox fans clamoring for Jason Benetti to call another White Sox game, you'll need to tune in to a future Detroit Tigers versus White Sox game for that.
Today's show is sponsored by Strawberry.me. Let me ask you something. Do you think championship athletes got to the top by guessing? No, they had coaching. Every elite athlete has a coach watching their form, calling the plays, and spotting the blind spots they can't see themselves. That's how championships are won. So why are you trying to win your career without a coach? You're grinding, hoping for the promotion, trying to read the politics, guessing your next move. That's amateur hour. If you want to perform like a pro, you need coaching. Strawberry.me matches you with a professional career coach who breaks down your game film. They help you negotiate the raise, navigate workplace politics, and execute a strategy that actually works. Stop riding the bench in your own life. Go to strawberry.me/podcast50 to get 50% off your first coaching session. Strawberry.me, because pros don't guess, they get coached to win.
On this podcast, we cite a lot of advanced metrics, but also thanks to StatCast, pitch metrics, and batted ball metrics. These are numbers that are important to players and coaches in many advanced leagues of baseball, high school, travel, showcases, college, minor leagues, and of course, Major League Baseball. Sure, when we played Little League, we had no idea how fast we were actually throwing or how much horizontal or vertical break we were getting on our pitches or our exit velocities. But today on the travel ball circuit, from under 12 age teams all the way through high school, college, and minor leagues and major leagues, we know. So what's new with the technology on hand, and what metrics are becoming most important to follow for pitchers and hitters? Well, joining us from Rapsodo, first-time guest is Brian Page. And Brian, thanks for coming on the Sox Machine podcast.
Yeah, hey Josh, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it, and I really appreciate you bringing me on.
So we've been talking about Rapsodo on this podcast and everything regarding Major League Baseball and how players have been training for at least 10 years, it seems like. And we are recording so much activity in the game of baseball. I was just in Texas for the college baseball series, and I had StatCast on my fingertips watching college baseball, and the number one presumptive prospect in the upcoming draft, Rock Chalowski. What has this experience been like for you at Rapsodo, and the evolution of when you guys started to where we are today?
Yeah, happy to go back to then. So actually, I played college baseball and I was a pitcher. So when I got started with Rapsodo, you mentioned they read the end game data, right? Some of this data it came out and it was made available, and you talk about like StatCast. A lot of that was like at the major league level, where you could see it, maybe on the broadcast, on platforms like a Savant, where you can see that data. However, when we were getting started, a lot of the practice data, there was not a lot of offering there. So when these guys are throwing their bullpens for like pitch design to either sharpen a pitch, or maybe they're adding a pitch to the arsenal, we see a lot about that in the off season, or the same on the hitting side, batting practice. A lot of this training goes on in a cage where you don't know what that ball is really doing. Or even out at the field, if you don't have your Hawkeye, your TrackMan, your in-game solution on. So when I get started with Rapsodo and we really took off, it was kind of, we thought, hey, with our cameras, this may be huge at the academy level, the high school, even maybe individual. And while, yes, that is true, we have, a big part of that market. Our phone started ringing from MLB of like, hey, we need solutions in the bullpen and batting practice, like I mentioned. So when we started, there's just two of us in Indianapolis. It was pretty cool getting the phone calls from the big league teams being like, hey, we want to talk at the winter meetings. We'd love to have you at spring training, because there's a need at the highest level of baseball for those analytics in a training setting.
Yeah, because it raises the question, like, how do you know you're getting better? Like, Brian, when we were playing Little League, let's be honest, how did we actually know we were getting better? It was just the results. Were we facing elite competition? We had no idea. Were we any close to being elite? No idea. But with Rapsodo and like what you guys are able to capture, I think with all this new technology provides so much more clarity that we have a better understanding of what a good baseball player is. But that is constantly changing, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. At that time, like I mentioned, I played in college. A lot of it was, again, as a pitching aspect, it was the catcher giving feedback. Okay, man, that slider looked sharp. That curveball looked sharp. Repeat that. A lot of it, based on your coach. What type of feedback are they giving you, if it's like a grip change or if it's maybe an arm slot change or mechanically driven. I think one thing that, solutions like Rapsodo has brought is all of those pitches, and with a video component, are being recorded so that those athletes can go replicate what they can do the best, because every arm's different. We got these different arm slots, different heights, different pitch arsenals. So for a coach at all levels, they're working with a different athlete. That's where we say, you don't want to be a cookie cutter approach. You don't want your whole arsenal to be throwing the same 3 pitches. So I think where we really come in is being able to track all that data, show it right on the iPad of how that ball's spinning, what the results were, so that athlete and coach can then go ahead and replicate that to sharpen a guy's arsenal, the best of their ability for, what they're doing on the mound.
Yeah. Because like you mentioned, as far as the pitching, like the pitching metrics itself, like what you guys are able to capture, and that has radically changed over the last 10 years. Like the fact that we are able to get consistent readings on velocity was a huge deal. I mean, we've been podcasting about the White Sox for 12 seasons, Brian. Like that was a big deal when we were getting accurate velocity readings. And then we were getting horizontal break and vertical break. So we can actually tell what's the difference between a slider and a cutter or a slurve or a sweeper. This is amazing. Now we have IBB, we have release distance now and extension and even release points of all these different pitches. Induced vertical break, IBB.
Right.
What are the metrics today on the pitching front that when you are working with scouts or even players that seem to be on the forefront of pitchers' minds when using your guys' technology?
Yeah. Happy to dive into that. That's really our bread and butter. So we're talking, I manage the MLB business here at Rapsodo. So I'm working with these organizations throughout the whole year of the spring training, rolling around through the season to the winter meetings. And these teams are talking at the MLB level. There's really 3 big ways they utilize this data. So one, they're scouting. They're getting more and more type of technology in Venezuela, Mexico, the DR, of course, to where they can get in front of athletes they may want to sign and get some data for projectability, understand where they're at, because these teams that have had this data for so long now, they know what they like. And that's, they kind of keep that secret sauce team to team of what they like about a pitch type or something with the spin rate or the way they tunnel the pitches. So one is big in scouting. And then the in-house players, they're doing really 2 things. They're evaluating the player of where they're at then, like in spring training to where maybe they go, for their assignment for minor league ball to major league ball. And they're also, the biggest part is developing them, right? So that's, hey, here's where you are. I think you can sharpen a pitch, add a curveball. Maybe you're more of a sweeping slider guy than gyro, right? So those are the 3 biggest ways. We talk about the data you mentioned, Josh. So it really starts out of the hand. So it's, how well is that player at any level tunneling, where they're releasing the ball, how far from the center of the rubber being the side, the extension you mentioned, like how close are they getting to home plate from the rubber, and then all of the ball flight metrics in the air. So that's going to be the spin rate, the horizontal vertical break, as you mentioned, the gyro degree. We provide about 25 data points on each pitch, including when it gets to the plate of exactly where it's going through the zone. So a lot of data to interpret and dive into for the coach. You talked about us being around for a little while with other technologies. It's been really cool to see the coaches kind of embrace this and understand how to use it from their teachings. Because in 2016, to be transparent, there's a bit of intimidation. You have coaches saying, hey, I've taught a curveball for 30 years. Why do I need an iPad to help? When really the idea is, hey, we're not changing the way you teach it. We're giving a visual for the athlete. We're storing it. We're allowing that to see the progression for the athlete over time. But back to your question on like the new White Sox broadcast and in baseball, seam shifted wake. I don't know if you dove into that. It's a pretty high level topic, but that's something we implemented into our technology just a couple of years ago. And that's kind of the big shiny thing is how do teams and players use the orientation of the pitch to get a little extra break with seam shifted wake, which comes from how the ball is oriented out of the hand. So pretty high level, but teams have dove into that to see, hey, how can we mess with the grip a little bit, get a seam orientation the right way to add 4 to 5 inches from that seam shifted factor.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that was on my question for you, because White Sox director of pitching Brian Bannister has talked about seam shifted wake the last couple of years, and especially when it comes to the changeup. So how does Rapsodo, like the technology, like when Brian Bannister talks about pitching, everyone on the White Sox media and White Sox fans listen, because this guy clearly knows what he's talking about with pitching. But like, we're talking physics here, aren't we, Brian? Like the way that the ball is leaving the hand and flying through the air until it lands into the catcher's mitt. Nobody ever thought about like how the wind and the air and gravity is impacting the baseball as it makes its path. But we're really getting granular here. So how does Rapsodo capture as far and provides an image and the dataization of the ball path to the catcher?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, I want to start with the White Sox are lucky because Bannister's one of the best out there. We've worked with Brian, leaders in the industry, so really awesome that with the White Sox. Getting into the seam shifted wake, you're exactly right. So the way we were able to implement it is a guy by the name of John Garrett, who's now in the analytic department with the New York Yankees. He did a lot of this research at Utah State with one of the industry experts, Spartan Smith, who's with the Angels staff. They did a lot of this research on how the seams are affecting the ball and ball flight at their Utah State lab. Also, Hawkeye was a big part of this as well, as they brought it to actual in-game data, where you can see that seam shifted wake data from in-game. So the way we were able to implement it at Rapsodo is with a big help to John. Since we're measuring all of that for the direct seam measurements, the trajectory break in the air, everything we provided allowed John to be able to add the seam shifted wake metrics into our pre 3.0 device. And when you mentioned the inputs, it is the first data points that we've had at Rapsodo to where the user is putting the altitude, the air pressure, the temperature. Those things are a part of how the ball is going to break in that environment. So that is the one thing the user will input. From there, we try to make it as easy on the pitcher, the athletes, and the coaches as possible, because we're showing the actual seam orientation in the app. So as you switch from maybe a 4-seam to a 2-seam grip, even this 1-seamer now that there's some experiment with, you see how that ball's spinning out of the pitcher's hand in the app. So that's one part of it. And then more of that's kind of the cause. Then the effect side, you're seeing right in the app, hey, plus 3 inches horizontal seam shifted wake due to how orientation was. That is how we try to simplify that, to just show, hey, here's the orientation, here's your result, back to being able to replicate that. Then as it gets into the reports and the actual data, we have charts that show it like on a Mollywood plot. That's how Hawkeye does that, where the baseball is kind of more of like an earth type of plot to show, hey, this is where the longitude latitude axis is. So it gets pretty high level pretty quick, but for any athlete that is developing pitches, they can see the way the ball is spinning and, hey, did I add or did I kill break? So we try to keep it kind of right there to be able for that pitch design session to allow them to experiment and maybe, sharpen a pitch, as I've mentioned.
So you mentioned as far as the atmospheric pressure and the temperature and the altitude, our beat reporter James Fegan definitely gets into the weeds when interviewing White Sox pitchers. Are we within 5 years of James saying, Brian, hey, I noticed the atmospheric pressure was low today. Is that why you were more slider heavy in your start? Are we that close to those types of questions and pitchers actually thinking about that?
I think maybe because we talk about these, Coors Field altitude in Arizona. There's different altitudes, right, where those teams can probably get an advantage from the pitch types they're throwing, how the seam shifted wake affects it in those environments. That is an important piece. And I think the last one I left out was humidity. So those are the 4. But Josh, I think you're right. I think certain pitching departments that really have dove into this, and if the player development side and the pitchers, at the big league level are open to that type of feedback, because now in these departments, the analytic teams, the player development, they're all more on the same page than ever. I would say when I started with this in 2016, there was a bit more of a divide, right? You had the analytics guys, the math guys, most part, player development coaches. Now they all work as a team. And I think those type of advantages, I think some teams will use that of, hey, this is the type of atmosphere in this ballpark, or this is maybe get a little advantage for a pitch type based off seam shifted wake. I think we absolutely could see that in the next few years.
No, I mean, it's a good point, because here in Chicago, if humidity does play a factor in some of these White Sox, for these White Sox pitchers and their pitch arsenal, April and May is much different on a humidity level than July and August at home, especially. So I wonder if they even have to make adjustments mid-season where it's like, hey, I'm facing the Royals for a second time. I faced them in April. It was 45 degrees. Now I'm facing in August. It's 85 degrees and it's super humid. I may have to change my pitch arsenal, not only because they've seen my stuff before, but maybe my slider or my sinker works better in humidity than it did in April. Okay, that's fascinating. That's so much to think about, Brian. And I've interviewed some of these pitchers who are like, hey, the catcher puts a number down and I throw it. that can't be the case anymore. So many of these guys are cerebral and so much smarter, and they are totally diving into here because it can give you that competitive advantage, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, the guy, top of the industry, like a Bannister, is definitely the type of guy that would be taking those things into account as, they develop and talk to their coaching staffs and player analytic teams and all of that to kind of be on the same page of a strategy like that. Absolutely.
So how does Rapsodo, if a pitcher comes in and says, yeah, I'm just not getting, I can't decide if I want to throw like a regular changeup or if I want to do a kick change, or, I need something to break more horizontally off my four-seamer. Does it make sense to go to a cutter, or should I throw more of a slider? How does Rapsodo help with pitch design?
Yeah, great question. That's something that, we get mentioned in a lot due to the metrics that we do measure, especially within the app, as I mentioned, seeing the spinning ball. Our early days really tight with like the driveline crew. That pitch design concept blew up. So helping in a situation like that, I wish it was, the pitching coaches have a tough job. Again, they're working with different arm slots, different athletes, different velocities, starters, setup guys, closers. So it's really individual guy by guy. But what you can do is, in the ramp up season, the time to be able to do some experimental with the pitch type, they can really look at a few specific data points, I think, to start. It's, the spin direction is exactly, it's shown on a face of a clock. So if you're throwing at 12 o'clock, you can think that's the straight backspin. As a righty, he's naturally going to leak over to, 1 o'clock because of the natural tilt. So they can see actually the axis the ball spinning on. We have a data point called efficiency, spin efficiency. So that's a percentage based. So to simplify that means if it's 100% efficient pitch, that means all of the spin RPMs are coming from either backspin, topspin, or side spin, which is going to maximize that movement. So for example, like if someone is trying to develop a gyro slider, that's that ball spinning like a bullet. It's called bullet spin sometimes. Spiral of a football is the way to think of that. You're really trying to get all of those RPMs to be from like a bullet spin, which is going to allow that pitch to be pulled by gravity down. But then a spin efficiency would look something more like 10%, for example. So, the spin direction, the spin efficiency, and then just the outcome being the breaks are three of the big ones to just kind of start that process of, like you mentioned, if you're changing from a kick change, a frisbee, the old traditional, just really pronate and type of traditional changeup, well, you can see what that break outcome is right then and there. Taking that a step further, we have what are called our break charts. So say a guy is they are a fastball, they're a curveball and changeup. There's a 3-pitch guy. As they throw their bullpens and collect more data, they can see the average break between those on a chart to where they can maximize those different breaks to basically give a different deception look to the hitter. The bigger that triangle is in a 3-pitch, for example, and as you add pitches, the bigger area that is, essentially the more type of break outcomes you can throw at the hitter to create more of an arsenal, more of break outcomes to deceive the hitter. So it really starts there, I would say, with the pitch design side of things. Is spin direction, spin efficiency, the breaks in general is a really good place to start to develop that arsenal, sharpen a pitch for each guy.
Does any pitcher ever reach 100% efficiency?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's really interesting. I spend a lot of time with the big league data due to doing the MLB stuff here. I would say the majority of fastballs at the big league level, especially the guys on the 40-man, are staying right around 98 to 100% on their fastball. And that's when you see the higher, VBs, because they're maximizing that. That's where they're not cutting the ball. So that's like, a big baseball term, of course, you hear guys cutting the baseball. When you cut the baseball unintentionally, it's going to stay flatter. You're going to kill the breaks. So when you're looking at these big league data sets, you see a lot of guys around 100 because, maybe it's not all backspin, but it's side spin and backspin maximizing their breaks. When you see guys that are more around like 80% efficiency, maybe it's a guy that just got drafted, overcompensating, just really trying to throw the ball hard, right? And they're cutting it a little bit where the break is suffering immediately from that because of that little cut, which can be a few inches of break, which can be a big deal, of course.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot when Dylan Cease used to be with the Chicago White Sox. When he was not on point, it was because that four-seamer was cutting on him, and he would admit it, and that's when he would go slider heavy. So I definitely remember those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example.
Yeah, because in college baseball, for podcast listeners, everybody was talking about, as far as the coaches, IVB. That was like the big one. And you see these fastballs and StatCast, and they're hitting 17, 18, 20. IVB. It's given this impression that the fastball is actually rising, which is impossible. It can't defy gravity, but I know that was one metric, and that's why I asked about the efficiency. If college programs are trying to get their guys to be at 90+%, I didn't know that you can be that high, especially with fastballs at the major league level. That is fascinating. So the people that do not like pitch metrics are obviously hitters who have been behind the curve and desperately trying to catch up and figure out how in the world can we get the league batting average above 250 again? Because hitting was already difficult to begin with, and it's just getting more difficult these days. And of course, now hitters have Traject, which we talked about. That's the fancy new multi-million-dollar pitching machine that actually can put up the image of the pitcher that they are facing pregame. We've heard from White Sox shortstop Colson Montgomery and how much that benefits him to get ready. But with Rapsodo and your guys' technology, and again, not everyone can afford a Traject machine. They're very difficult to build, and the lead time is weeks to get one, so not everyone has one. College programs don't have one yet. But you still got TrackMan, you still got Rapsodo. So on the hitting side, how are you guys helping them to try to catch up with all the things that pitchers are focused on?
Yeah, and Josh, you're exactly right. It's the pitchers. I pitched in college, so I lean that way as well. They definitely have had the tools to be able to attack the hitters more, and the hitters have definitely not got like the same type of technology over the years. But I would say what we do at Rapsodo is, all that ball flight metric we provide to the hitters as well. So if we kind of switch gears onto the hitting side, that starts with the zone location of where the contact's being made. So we're able to give the heat maps of where, their exit velocity charts, maybe where they have strengths and weaknesses just from an exit velocity and ex-WOBA projection, batting average projection from the zone. And then we're going to be able to, of course, exit velocity, spin rate is a direct correlation to the quality of contact. So the lower that spin rate is when you see more of those harder velocity balls that kind of have that knuckle type action to them, which of course is going to kill distance, but it's kind of a quality contact type of measurement of ball hitting center of barrel on that plane. And then we're also the spin direction, like I mentioned on the pitching side, same way. If driving a ball into center field at 12 o'clock, that's going to 12 o'clock spin. That's going to have that type of spin rate that's going to allow that ball to carry you further from the spin direction side. But you mentioned Traject, which is was a partner of ours, and the Rapsodo data would help train that device to throw an accurate pitch. Pairing anything, I would say, like live on live type of sessions allows the hitters to see like an accurate pitch. If that's from Traject, they do it the best. You can dial in other pitching machines. You see a lot more philosophy of hitters facing more of a live ball. I think we're kind of more of the T-work type of stuff. It's a little bit more dead, soft toss, front toss. Guys are getting a lot of more of like actual reps to where they can see how they are facing these 98 to 103 mile per hour fastballs. The velocity is just off the charts at the big league level. So I think what we do for these hitters is allow them to really set up that actual competitive environment more with the data feedback so that they can face more of that live action, but then they can also track their progression over time too of, the exit velocity, what their launch angle is looking like if they're in a certain window. Because of course the hitter has to react to the pitch, right? So it's not always easy. You can't just say, no matter where the pitch is, I want a 25-degree launch angle into the gap, right? It's not, the hitter is, of course, reactive. But I do think with our profiles and being able to track that over time, a hitter can kind of understand their strengths and weaknesses and then dial that into maybe, hey, I'm seeing up and in fastball is my bread and butter. I can get the barrel out. I should look for that. Where I know low and away, I'm rolling these over. You can get that type of data from Rapsodo. The last thing I'll say on the hitting side is, when I played college in Indiana. It's snowing in February when we're getting out to the field. A lot of the country's that way, no matter the level. So you're doing a lot of hitting in the cage. I think there's a lot of misconceptions that happen in the cage and bad habits of like where they think the ball's going. So we're able to provide the field as well of, hey, this is where that ball would actually travel to and play on like a big league field. So I think that's a big part of it too. So you're not making bad habits in the cage in the off season. You kind of see how that ball would actually play in a game. But definitely a lot more on the pitching side we're able to provide. The hitters are still looking for that big advantage for sure.
Well, you mentioned like the heat map for hitters. That was something that Colson Montgomery told us at Sox Fest, podcast listeners. And I thought it was a great point made by him. Pitchers have heat maps on you. Us hitters,
Absolutely.
we need to have heat maps for ourselves and have a better understanding of what our actual like wheelhouse is, and just look in that area to really pull off our A swing. And I thought, wow, that for a guy who hasn't played a full season yet, that is so like insightful and just having a very good understanding in the craft of hitting. So in those heat maps, is that something Rapsodo puts out on the iPad when they're swinging over time? Like how many swings does Rapsodo need to see in order for a hitter to have an accurate heat map?
Yeah, it's a great question, and probably up to like the philosophy of that coach and player. But the way it works in Rapsodo is if you take you get 20 balls in a session, you're immediately going to see it in the app and the report where we're going to be able to show.
Okay.
So I think ideally, that's where the profiles are so important at any level. Getting into the right profile, you're going to collect all of that data over time. So, working with, the White Sox for 10 years, if they want to go back and see a guy that's been with the league, the team 10 years, they go back to that first session and they can filter that out. So over time, that heat map's just going to grow and grow. I think one of the more important things is we have session types. So high intent, low intent, batting practice tee.
Okay.
So that creates the correct split, because of course a guy can manipulate and, hit the ball well off a tee in those different quadrants, but you can filter in, hey, here's off a live arm. And then that's when you can really see, you get those data sets. Say a guy at spring training, he faces 10 different pitchers throughout a couple weeks. You can then split it up lefty, righty. You see their pitching data. So you can really get into dialing in, hey, here's your real strengths based off of, the pitch types you're seeing, the velocities you're seeing at a high intent level. So that's always just continuing to build on these guys' reports based off of the session type, the intent, as long, getting into the Rapsodo data. Then also teams will pull that data through API and create their own reports that are real secret to the teams, and a big advantage.
Yeah, it's all connected too, because they need those heat maps, especially if they are getting torpedo bats, because torpedo bats are supposed to be customized based on a particular player's swing. So that's where they can take that information from Rapsodo. Here's my heat map. They can go to the bat manufacturer and they can get the barrel. So it's all connected, podcast listeners. Like that's really great stuff.
Yeah. So real life example of that, I just got back from Phoenix where I saw a lot of the teams out there. I go to spring training every year. And you mentioned these bat manufacturers. As we got to one of the labs for a team, that manufacturer was there doing the lab onboarding for the bats. They had all their bats out, the different type of woods. They had the torpedoes. They had the different sizes, of course, the different knobs. What that looks like at spring training is these guys have these biomechanic sensors on, so how they're moving. They have Rapsodo for the ball flight. They have force plates for how their feet are moving, or their body weight transitions looking, and then they can dial in the correct bat for them. And it's these manufacturers go to them, and the guys can come in and get the right bat for them. And it's pretty cool to see those type of scenarios to get the correct bat for optimal success.
Can't borrow bats anymore. If you break a bat and you're out of bats, it's going to be tough. You're going to be swinging a bat that's not for you. So good luck, major leaguers. You guys also have, I noticed on the website, Rapsodo certifications. So what's that about? Like for our podcast listeners that maybe are into coaching, what do these certifications do?
Yeah. Really glad you asked. So certifications we felt were necessary to really help educate at all levels. So what we talk through is what each data point means. And then we get into really kind of how to apply. So something at Rapsodo is we understand we're not the coaches. A lot of us played baseball through college or even at the pro level. But we understand there's different philosophies of how to teach a swing, how to throw a curveball, right? But what we want to make sure is clear in these certifications is what the data means and then how it can be applied to that philosophy for that coach at any level. So what you'd see in the certifications, if you were to check it out, is, again, each of the data points for, we have 4. So we have pitching and hitting for baseball, and we have pitching and hitting for softball, since, of course, a softball pitch is a much different profile, of course, with how those athletes throw. So that intention is to go through, be able to be an expert on what the data means, how you can apply it. We have some coaches in there too from the baseball and softball world to kind of talk about how their programs use it. And then there's a certification piece to where a little bit of a test type of thing where you can go through, take a test and get that certification of, hey, kind of a Rapsodo expert on understanding the data.
And that must be that must help get as far as like coaching jobs. I can see that like being a future requirement for some programs that use your guys' technology. Be like, hey, this is important. Like other jobs out there in the corporate world, to be certified in this type of technology can really help.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I can think of a good 15 to 20 big league clubs that made that a requirement in their analytic programs or in their analytic division. We shot those videos in 2018, I believe. So as again, the data in the practice setting for bullpens and batting practice was still pretty new at that time. So you're exactly right, Josh, to where even at the big league level, the departments wanted to see the staff go through that, so they had that understanding of what the data means and how to apply it. And they still to this day. Just got back from Sabre. I don't know if you've been out to Sabre on the Phoenix side. What we do is we make all attendees get access to those courses, which is awesome to see, these students and different people in the baseball world that are really diving into the analytics.
Well, then finally, we talked a lot about what the technology does today and all the metrics that players are using to further their player development. Let's talk about the future and what tomorrow holds. What are you guys envisioning as far as the technology? I know you just came out with a new Rapsodo device. Where are we going in the next 5 to 10 years when it comes to tech and baseball, Brian?
Yeah, I wish I had that answer. I would say we're very fortunate that we do have these close relationships with like the big league clubs and colleges and just the top people in the baseball world. So when I go to the winter meetings every year, that's one of the first questions I'm asking is, where are the Chicago White Sox with this? Where's the teams we work with in the league of, hey, what is new? Because what we do, we try to be really receptive to that feedback of that's how we hear about, hey, seam shifted wake. You should get ahead of that. This should be something Rapsodo can do. We hear that from the big league clubs. Back in the day of like 2016 when I started, we had a device on a tripod that could not give any release information. We go to the winter meetings, they say, hey, the release information is a huge piece of this. Tunneling is about to get really popular. We need to know how these athletes are releasing the ball. So we move our device from a tripod to the ground to get that. So I would say from Rapsodo, we just had launched our Pro 2.0 pretty recently, which is a really user-friendly device for both baseball and softball. Easy to take it indoor, outdoor, be able to collect data anywhere. But when it comes to like the data points itself, I'm excited to learn as well of like, hey, what's the next big thing? I think people are going to spend a good amount of time with seam shifted wake, like we had talked about with, hey, can we grab an advantage in our own ballpark or with this guy's unique delivery or the way they grip the ball. I know focus for us is, we're big in the training side, but, getting the data to, more actual in-game live intent, I think something you probably see from Rapsodo in the future of, we work with the biggest people in the industry with like USA Baseball, the biggest showcases where these athletes are. And I think we want to be able to get them data as much as we can to develop them on their journey to get the most potential in a draft pick or a D1 scholarship from a Vandy or a Wake or, one of these top programs. That's really what we're trying to do is kind of listening to the industry and then make that available to all athletes. Like, of course, the big league usually know, what to do with it, but we want these guys developing, a high school arsenal to have that same ability to, have a shot to play D1 ball and get drafted.
Yeah, I wish I had something. I just saw Grady Emerson in Texas. He's the number one prep prospect in the upcoming draft. I wish I had something portable because how hard did he hit the ball? I got no idea. I didn't have any device or anything on me, so I can't accurately portray on how well Grady Emerson hit the baseball. But we'll have that technology soon, even at the high school level. You got White Sox coaches, Brian, pulling out their iPhones, recording how guys are leading off and their first steps defensively. I could imagine that being a request, like, how can you guys help us with positioning and defense with this new capture technology? So I'm excited to see what the future holds. Podcast listeners, again, if you're on the coaching side, whether it's travel ball, little league, high school, if you're interested in knowing more about Rapsodo for your baseball or softball players, you can visit rapsodo.com. If you're an avid golfer, I noticed this as well when checking out your guys' website. If you're super into golf, they got some really cool golf technology. Like, you can build your own golf simulator at home using Rapsodo, which is pretty cool. So if you love golf, you can check out those solutions as well. And Brian, I love this conversation. This is what we do at Sox Machine. We get into the weeds and we nerd out about all this type of data because really in the end, Brian, for baseball enthusiasts, they may say this is too much math and too much science for me. But this is the stuff that MLB front offices care a great deal about because this influences their decision making. and not just signing guys, trading guys, drafting guys, but also how they develop baseball players to try to get better.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, love what you guys do, Josh, and love talking through it. But yeah, you're absolutely right that the teams are paying attention to this type of data more than ever. It's going to continue to grow that way as the coaches, the players, because also too, we're at the point where these athletes grew up with this more. Because when I got to spring training for the first time, these veterans I don't want a camera in the bullpen. Like, how are the teams doing this? Yeah. We don't need that. And then now these guys went to academies, school, and they know, like, hey, I want to see my Rapsodo data, or, other data as well. Like, I want to see, hey, what was spin efficiency on that slider? It felt a little off. And so that's kind of grown too. So we're just going to see more and more of that.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining the Sox Machine podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh. Love it.
That will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. And again, huge thank you to Brian Page of Rapsodo for joining me and having that very insightful conversation about new baseball technology. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You can also check out our videos at our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SoxMachine. We're on all the social media platforms. You can follow us at Sox Machine. You can follow our beat reporter, James Fegan, at JR Fegan. You can follow me at SoxMachine_Josh. We are on Blue Sky at SoxMachine.com. James is JRFegan.SoxMachine.com. And I am Josh.SoxMachine.com. If you enjoy our work and want full access to all of our coverage of the Chicago White Sox and Major League Baseball and the upcoming Major League Baseball draft, sign up to become a Sox Machine subscriber at SoxMachine.com/products. Your subscriptions make it possible for us to go out on the road, for me to go to Texas to cover the MLB draft, for James Fegan to go to Milwaukee and Kansas City to start the season on the road to cover those games for us, and Jim Margulis to visit the White Sox minor league affiliates. Your subscriptions go a long way in order for us to cover the White Sox the way that we do and try to bring you the best information, analysis, and insight that we possibly can. So for our current subscribers, again, huge thank you for continuing to support us at SoxMachine.com. If you're new and you would like to help support us and get an ad-free experience both on the website and the podcast, monthly plans start at $5. And there are annual subscriptions with discounts, again, at SoxMachine.com/products. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.